Hello there, and welcome to Hip Hop Real.
Just true hip hop.
Keeping it anyway. No, welcome to Melbourne Real, coming to you live and direct from Australia's most livable, well, the world's most livable city, as well as Australia's most livable
Absolutely.
city, Melbourne, Australia. I'm your host, Tony Jack the Bear Mantz. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an inspirational speaker, and I master a few records from time to time as well, just for a bit of a lark. And I'm joined with my co-host, the singer and songwriter, bass player from Damn the Maps, and knower of the real hip hop, Martin Green.
Hello. How are you?
G'day, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Excellent.
So here we are, and I kind of feel like if you're going to introduce me as someone as the knower of real hip hop, I should at least have dropped something, musical. But get fucked. Let's get the show on.
All right, so big shout out. Can I just a couple quick shout outs, please, to Brian Rose at London Real, Adam Lowry at Cognitive Rampage. Big shout out to Brad Burton, who's been just killing it around the world at the moment, which has been wonderful to see, and to Peter Sage as well. Big love to you, boys.
Right, let's get the show on the road.
All right, so today we've got Joseph Price, aka Soxy Music. Joseph's a mate of mine who how long have we known each other for now, Joseph? What?
11 years. Man.
11 years.
Yeah.
And
you mastered my first and second single.
Yeah.
Which is a flashy way of saying I paid you money to make me sound better.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joe runs Soxy Music. Joe is a luthier of particular note. He's a guitar tech. He's an amp tech. He's had a very interesting life. He's just a great guy to hang out with. And
amps as well, yeah?
I do, yeah. But
cool.
To a much lower level.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so we hadn't seen each other for a while, and we've just been following each other on Facebook and just following each other's journeys and stuff. And I called out to Joe. I said, dude, let's why don't we just catch up? We haven't seen each other in fucking ages. We should catch up and have a good face-to-face.
With microphones and cameras.
Well, we did a little warm-up without it.
Good. With eggs.
And so I said, hey, we're doing this podcast, and Joe said, hey, listen, I want to come on and have a talk about some stuff. I said, no worries, mate. Let's do it. So anyway, without further ado, Joseph Price, aka Soxy Music. Welcome to Melbourne Real, my friend.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Lovely to have you on.
What do you want to talk about?
Fundamentally, we've got like about an hour, something like that.
Something like that.
I want to talk about changing approaches in mental health, how people view that.
Yep, beautiful.
I want to talk about, in as clear a manner as possible, which is difficult for me because I tend to ramble, about my own experience of mental health and how that's dovetailed in my life.
We'll stop you from rambling.
In a positive way as well as a negative way. It's very easy to make an assumption, I would as well, that if you have a serious mental illness, that can only be a hindrance. But actually, especially in the fields of the arts or any area where you're pushing yourself incredibly hard, it's very rare to find, say, for example, even a dedicated CEO is going to have a degree of OCD going on there.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Didn't hurt Rain Man.
No, exactly. Yeah. So, I'd like to sort of talk about that in my life and how that dovetails into my work.
Cool. So, is it okay to ask?
You can ask anything.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you obviously got into this field as your average psychotherapist and counsellors do due to some personal.
Yeah, I had an experience when I was just about 15 where I didn't attempt suicide, but I remember clearly I woke up one day and I was very scared because I'd lost any sort of sense of morality about doing that. What I mean by that was the idea of how it would affect my family. Mm-hmm. And that scared me quite badly, and my parents called a GP, and I grew up in a little village called Sunningdale, which is sort of very close to the Ascot Racecourse, which is sort of 40-minute on the train.
This is in Australia?
No, in the UK.
In the UK.
To London, and at the time, that was sort of close enough to this place where, fortunately, the GP that came, he worked with a lot of musicians, so he was able to talk to me, and he put me on a drug which now is incredibly common, but at the time, Zoloft, or at the time, to prescribe off-label, which is when you prescribe outside the recommended guidelines, you're going to get pulled up if you do that more than a couple of times a year as a GP. Mm-hmm. So it was quite a brave move on his part. Later in my life...
How did you react to that drug?
It was actually quite severe, yeah. Not to be critical of the drug.
Severe good or severe bad?
Well, a friend of mine I was walking with a friend of mine and he told me that his mum had died. And it was as serious a reaction internally as if I said I've misplaced my Snickers. You know, it was sort of like, oh yeah, okay. And I was somebody who had quite a high degree of sensitivity, and I remember thinking, that's not quite normal.
It's not like what you would normally do.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sure.
But later in my life, in my later 20s, I worked as a medical rep, and ironically, one of the jobs I did, I started selling these drugs into hospitals. So I know a lot about the theory, and it is a theory about how they work. And I'm a little bit on the fence about the whole thing because I take a number of medications, but for many, many years I have not. And the science is overly simplified in a manner to sell it effectively. However, it also has a really beneficial effect. So it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario, you know?
It does have a beneficial effect, I think, but it also has some pretty serious negative ones, I think.
Yep.
Especially as the time goes along on that graph, I think things sort of get a bit bad. Especially given that my understanding of especially the SSRIs, etc., is that there's never actually been any long-term studies. The only long-term study there is just who's on it for as long as
they've been on it.
That's right.
Well, they're relatively recent drugs. I mean, Zoloft was the first, and then most pharmaceutical companies have a policy called a Me Too drug, which is if they think they can get more than 5% market share on a drug, they'll get it on that, because it's about just getting some share of voice, and it's about relationships and all that stuff. The point.
So tell me, just tell me, a lot of people talk about almost in an urban myth kind of fashion, although it seems plausible. But I'll just put on silent, man. I did put it on silent, but still just wanting to be a real.
You've just got so many girlfriends.
Yeah. So if you want to call it an urban myth, although I find it plausible, was the notion that pharmaceutical reps would go to see doctors, they'd push certain things on them, then then the doctors would then prescribe those things because their own inducements and incentives. So
the reason
is that true? Does that go on to the same degree as we've been told it goes, or in your experience?
I will answer it. I won't be vague, but the reason that myth came about in the first place is because in America that does happen. And the reason it happens in America is it's an incredibly high base salary and incredibly high commission. So it's pretty much, most of those guys are starting on 100,000 K, which in terms of purchasing power parity, what that will buy you in Australia is the same as about 180,000 bucks. And they have a serious degree, and they're very good looking boys and girls and all of that. In America, it's completely legal. I can, with the right software, which they will have, I can find out which doctor is prescribing which drug in how many amounts. In Australia and in the UK, you can't do that. You have to do what's called a brick, and a brick is a minimum of 3 pharmacies. So in reality, yes, I can find out what Jack's prescribing, but the reality is Jack has a relationship with both the rep and the drug. So let me explain. Most GPs have a fairly cynical view of both medical reps and the pharmaceutical community. However, they have to pass these kind of qualification points every 3 years in order to stay registered. And it's something which their own organizations, which they pay fees to, don't organize. So what happens is that the medical companies organize these, what you would call like a weekend or a study night, and it has a set number of points attached to it, which they can use to put towards their grand total and make sure they're on track. And the kind of compromise there is that, the drug reps will get an opportunity to, frankly, push what's better about theirs. But it's a bit like, imagine if I came to you, Tony, and said, hey, Tony, you're using like the Manly compressor. Man, that's shit. And you'd be like, Joe, listen, man, I've been using this for what? How many years?
25.
All right. And how many styles of music have you used that successfully on?
Countless.
Now, I'm telling you, look, I hate to tell you, man, but this is my graph, massive inflated graph with lots of colors. Actually, for rock and hip hop, you're going to get a much deeper and fatter bass. Now, you as a professional go, what does deeper and fatter mean? Give me some frequencies. But no, Tony, let me explain, and we go on like this. So in terms of this idea of a junket and freebies and all of that, it happens in the States. It did happen in the UK, and there were workarounds. But the pharmaceutical industry, both here and in the UK, kind of really wants to carry on regulating itself. Yep. And that's not unusual. Like lots of industries don't want to be regulated by government. So the way they get around that is they've tightened up on all of that. I think 30 years ago, did that happen? Absolutely. But if you look at the history of prescribing, if you were married and an unhappy wife in the 70s, you were going to get a prescription for Valium. No ifs, no buts about it. That was what was going to happen.
Mother's little helper.
Yeah, and and the numbers were severe. If you are below the age of 10 now in a highly developed Western economy, and you have signs of ADHD, which to me is it's a curve. It's not an on-off button. You know, it's like a variable potentiometer. You're going to get riddling. Do you know what I mean? So, in terms of which comes first, these are healthcare solutions that filter down from, you know, essentially what is an increased expectation on us as individuals, what we put on ourselves, what society puts on us, and it ends up being, in my opinion, kind of a two-way mirror.
Yeah. Anyway, so getting back to your story.
Sure.
And you were talking about, with your friend, and you said to yourself, shit, this is really unusual that I would respond in such a very flatline kind of way. Yeah.
So I came off that drug after about, I think, 18 months, something like this. And I started playing guitar at 13. By the age of 15, I was playing 3 nights a week with my brother, who's a drummer, and another guy in a trio. And there was a lot of gigs happening at that time. You could get those gigs. And obviously I lived at home, so I had plenty of money. And I just sort of bought and sold gear. And this is, pre-internet. So it was, you'd sort of do it at the back of, newspapers, basically. And I started buying and selling gear. And eventually I learned to do, at that level, a setup, which is where you adjust the guitar to play more easily and be more in tune and generally be a more fun experience. It varies, but that's sort of the basics.
The gist,
yeah.
So you were getting some action by the time you were 13. that was a guitar setup joke.
Yeah, I'd love to say I did, but no.
Fretting on the boards.
Nice.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
So once you had that, I guess, that activity, does this lead back to the mental health in that you were finding yourself changing?
I think so. I think I felt a lot of social pressure to enjoy going out. And, the UK and Australia have a very, very similar idea about what that looks like. It means going to pubs, getting drunk, all of that.
How'd you feel about that?
I was pretty negative about the whole thing. My brother was training very hard to be a professional cyclist, and I played in a band, which I normally name check, but for reasons of time and stuff like that, I won't do it here. But I played in a band where 2 of the guys in the band were from very famous rock families.
Right.
And one of the guys introduced one of the other guys to cocaine. And cocaine's a lot cheaper in the UK. Like it's significantly cheaper and more available. And I watched it over the period of a year just destroy this guy's life. And it scared me a bit. But by the age of 19, most of my friends had tried drugs. And I was beginning to feel less pleased with myself along the lines of, I'm better than that, or that kind of slightly superior thing. And I started taking ecstasy and speed. And I just couldn't believe how great it was. The ability to control my mood with drugs, which is what it was just phenomenal to me. When I was 23, so it was like a 4-year period of taking quite a lot of drugs, I quit taking drugs pretty much overnight.
Can I ask, what was your ecstasy peak? Like, how many would you do in a night when you were peaking?
Oh, never that many. I never liked getting really, really out of it. Well, as you know, I'm assuming you've taken it.
Once or twice?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's a very pleasant sensation, effectively, of falling in love both with yourself and with your surroundings, which sounds like a real advert for it, doesn't it? But unfortunately, the come down in terms of the depletion of serotonin in your brain is very severe. In fact, there's a reasonable argument. They can't prove it because they can't actually map these things yet. They'll be able to in about 10 years, but there's this thing called your 5-HT pathways, which is kind of almost like the highways upon which your serotonin travels, and there's a kind of a decent argument that it burns off whole sections of the highway. So your serotonin.
Jack and I are both big advocates for 5-HTP.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. We love that shit.
So essentially, just to kind of tie up the whole, what happened, historiography, I was 23 and I stopped taking drugs, and I pretty much had
what was the catalyst that made you decide that you would, and overnight as well?
Yeah, I'd started flirting with heroin, which I was living in Glasgow.
That old party trick.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to explain. In Scotland, there's a very distinct kind of idea about the difference between drinking, hardcore drinking, and being an alcoholic. And how that plays out in terms of specifically in Glasgow and Edinburgh and with heroin is that it's so rampant. It's so everywhere. You will routinely...
Like train spotting type?
Yeah,
type
I mean,
style?
that was filmed at the time I was living there in this little club down the end of, the main street.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. It's not just a myth. I saw a podcast recently, somebody saying, oh, it's just a myth. It's like, no, it's not a myth. There are whole families where they will completely disown their kid because they've already stuck them for rehab one time. And so, blah, blah, blah. Getting to it, I realized I was in a bit of trouble. And I thought, Jesus, I'm really unhappy, and I'm sort of masking it with all these drugs. So I stopped taking drugs, but unfortunately I had a massive sustained manic episode, which resulted in me being hospitalized for about 2 separate times, but about 3 months in total. Yeah.
Still, you know what? I think even after you've been taking drugs for that many years and antidepressants, to get to a point where you can actually stop and say, I'm in trouble here, that takes a phenomenal amount of self-awareness in just in the real world. But if you're already been, I mean, it's just a compliment, mate.
At 23. At 23.
Yeah, I think that's wow, that's incredible.
I kind of have a different view on self-awareness. I feel that self-awareness in and of itself is not an immensely useful tool. And I realize that's quite a controversial thing to say, but I think one of the problems, it's a good thing that we're also developing this idea of being more aware of what pushes our buttons. What is our culture we grew up in? What was the family dynamic we grew up in? How to relate to our elder sister or our dad or whatever, right? But the problem is that, like, and this is sort of more my core religious beliefs, is that, like...
In which religion is that?
I practice a form of Buddhism called Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, which sort of originally stems from Japan, but it's fairly extensively practiced around the world. Okay. Is that your core life state, your core karma, it's kind of like... It's not a fixed position, but unless you pay attention to working on yourself and changing yourself in a fairly daily manner, and you and I have discussed this before, you end up kind of snapping back to that core karma. And mine specifically is anger. If I don't really pay attention to what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, I can get angry over just ridiculous things. I look at it, and when I'm not angry, and I think that's ridiculous. But yeah, I've seen that pattern within myself.
What's your definition of angry?
It's not always as obvious as like freaking out and starting fights with people, but just like allowing inner frustration to build to a point where it has no value. So if I'm getting angry at myself or externalizing that to someone else, but there may be a reason, but there's no value to it, then it's just a destructive emotion.
So it's not even funny, because for me, if I get angry and I can say some really decent swear words, it's worth it. it's worth it for me. You know what I mean. You fucking shitty power tool. I
think Aussies have a sense of the ridiculousness about male anger. I've sensed that. I think Aussies can kind of see that it's a release valve that has its place, but too much of it is a little bit like you're indulging yourself. I think that in the UK especially, it varies in parts of the UK, but there is this almost like hangover from cultural imperialism and ruling effectively half the known world. There's kind of a hangover of anger because anger on a Friday night, if you're leaving the pub at 11 o'clock, it can be a useful thing because it'll save you. If you start a fight with somebody, and it's this sort of pseudo bullshit respect thing that happens with anger in the UK for young men, and it's frankly it's encouraged. To be honest,
Wow.
Geezers need excitement. If their life doesn't provide it, they incite violence. You know what I mean?
But look, I see a fair bit of that here too. I mean, I've seen some young men, quite a few who I know personally, 21, 22.
Sure.
Who, same thing. Anger is almost a badge of honor. And there's this need to present a veneer of toughness.
Yeah, and it is a veneer.
And I think that's not just with young men. I think that that can be with lots of men.
Yeah, you can get
but
it.
You see it particularly.
It's
particularly aggressive,
But it's about focus, and the probably the main difference in terms of this area we're talking about between Australia and the UK is Australians are born and bred with this idea of using sports as a positive outlet, and I think that's a great thing, especially for young men.
So not so much in the UK with football and rugby and
soccer's more like it's different. The class system changes things. So like if you play rugby in the UK and you're from the south of England, right, you are definitely going to a private school. 100%.
Yeah.
If you play rugby in the north,
hang on, but I think private schools referred to as public.
Yeah,
isn't that right?
Somewhere where your parents pay money for you to attend. There's the notion if you're rich in Australia, it doesn't actually matter if your daddy owns a double glazing firm. You're just rich. Period.
Yeah.
In the UK, it's a really common thing. Someone go, which university did you go to? You can tell them that. which school did you go to? What does your daddy do? It's like a kind of a funnel down effect.
It's that real old school type thing.
Yeah, and it's a real thing, and it's kind of.
I think it's here in Australia too. I think it's starting here in Australia. I think kids that go to Wesley and Scotch and MLC and Geelong Grammar and all that. It's maybe not to the same degree with as long a history, but people I've met in recent times. Who have who are in that world, tell me, this shit goes on here.
So moving forward to closer to present day.
Sure.
What do you use now to manage your mood, depression?
Yeah. What do I use? Okay. For a long time, I just used weight training.
Right. So exercise. Yep.
Yeah, and to a reasonably large. It was quite successful, but. I kind of reached a stage about a year ago where I thought I just can't keep white-knuckling this situation, because essentially I could do, it wasn't unusual for me to do a 14-hour day, 3 days in a row, and I get an intense amount of work done. But of course then I would crash for 3 days, and I sort of started to realize that over a span of, say, 4 weeks, it felt like I was doing an awful lot of work. But if you start to take a median of what the production is at the end of that time, I wasn't getting anywhere near as much done as I felt that I was. And so I started seeing a specialist psychiatrist, and I was fully expecting him to put me on a drug called lithium, which I'd been on for 5 years. Which I didn't want to take because it's a natural element, but unfortunately the doses which you need to control bipolar is extremely close to a toxic dose. And you also process fat a lot more efficiently. So I'd been as high as 105 kilos on it, and I'm 176 centimeters. So it was, I didn't want to do that. No. And he put me on a drug which is an anticonvulsant, for people who shake. I take that. I take a low dose.
Is it Thorazine?
No, it's lamotrigine. Yeah. I made a point of not kind of staying abreast of it all, because I didn't want, a very big thing in my life. It was a big thing that happened, but I didn't want it to define me. I was really, really adamant about that. And I was very angry about certain aspects of my family relationships that were very, in a caring way, but pushing for me to go, this has happened, this is who you are, and you've got to adjust everything around that. And I didn't do that, for right or wrong.
So you're currently on medication still?
Yeah. I've just pretty much only been off about a year.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I ask this to everybody because this topic comes up quite a lot for us, because I'm such an advocate for nutrition. What are your thoughts on nutrition for mental health? Yeah,
I have a lot of thoughts about that. I like to cook. I do cook. But for me, if I don't train, I don't eat right. Because as soon as I'm not training, the almost internal stimulus for wanting to eat a lot of pizza, a lot of burgers, a lot of fried fatty foods and sugary foods, it's quite high. You'll find with people who have heroin addiction or people who have depression, generally they tend to have a quite sweet tooth.
Absolutely.
If I could, I would not eat sugar at all, because I think it is a stimulus response. I think it adds to inflammation of the cells and this kind of thing.
It creates an anaerobic reaction, an anaerobic environment, an acidic environment. You can't. There's no way you can be healthy. Of course.
But I guess because my own experience within the area of working in science, I'm kind of a little bit on the fence in that I'm not impressed by data. It's not that they manipulate data, they don't, but when you're writing a placebo double control multi-center study, you're still trying to write the actual mission statement along a line of hitting a certain goal
and to sell the product.
Effectively.
Right. But no one's going to write all that data to sell a fucking beetroot, are they?
No, they're not. But I guess there's this sort of rise of there's veganism and there's paleo and there's all these things, and at the end of the day, what I think it's important people do is try. So for instance, I try not to eat a lot of bread. Any kind of flour-based product doesn't really agree with me. Right. I don't mix milk and meat because when I was
you know what, you don't need data for that. You just eat it and you see the reaction
and you get the data right there and how you feel.
It's what doctors call empirical data, and when you speak to most specialists, they're much more concerned with what their experience has been with that drug on that type of patient. So I'm much more interested to say, hey Tony, what are you eating right now? What's working for you? What isn't? And then try it myself.
Do you supplement?
I go through phases doing a lot of magnesium, a lot of zinc.
You have to if you're working out and you're doing, of course. Yep.
Yeah, I basically eat a
Fish
very
oil?
high protein diet.
What's one?
Fish oil?
Yeah, I've got all that stuff. I go
Yeah.
through phases of like really
Yeah.
hitting it hard, but to me, unless I'm working out, it's just doesn't really.
I guess, you know
happen.
what, and I guess it doesn't really matter, so long at the end of the day, you're doing it.
Yeah,
You know, whatever the motivation is, if it's there and you're doing it, that's really what counts.
for me, it's sort of like it's a thing where like I'm lucky. I really, really enjoy my work. My work is my passion, and it's my hobby, and I love guitars. For a long time, I was a musician who thought I enjoyed guitars. Actually, if I'm going to define myself, I'm just a guy that really loves guitars. And I like a lot of techs who, you know, which for reasons I understand, they get tired of fixing up shitty guitars. I love cheap guitars. I love expensive guitars, cheap guitars, broken ones, the whole thing. It's just, it's almost the epitome of the female form, you know. It's just this.
It is.
There's
I
just
see
something
that. Yeah.
wonderful about those curves. You know?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about religion, how that came into your life, and
Yeah.
and how it plays in your day to day.
Sure. Well, when I was 19, I was playing in a funk band, which I don't know. Does funk bands, they still exist? Is that
I think
still
so.
a thing?
Yeah,
I think so.
they're around. They're around.
There was a band that had come out, I think before Jamiroquai. They were called Galileo or something like that, and they were playing instrumental funk and kind of playing these big festivals. And so my brother went and hustled a bunch of gigs in these kind of jazz cafe, you know, like jazz cafe kind of places.
Nice.
You know? Yeah, nice.
Nice.
Yeah. And we had this female saxophonist who wasn't a great player, but she was really hot, and you know that helps.
She was a
Sell
bit
gigs.
sexy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Not Soxy, but sexy.
Sexy,
Yeah, you
yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my brother brought in this percussionist, and he was a white guy. He was definitely white, but he was really tall, and he had this funky beard, and he strange way of talking, strange way of dressing, and he would sort of go off in the corner and be before gigs. And I was just kind of intrigued. I said, "Hey man, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo." I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" And he explained. I said, "Okay." And I'm sort of somebody who, I don't always act on the impulse of what I want to do. I tend to think about it and, you know, really mull it over and pros and cons. But I just felt a very clear desire. I said, "Can I do that with you?" He went, "Yeah." And
Did you ask him what the reason was for doing it before a show?
Yeah. Later on, I did. Yeah, he said it was just to pray that, hope the music's really good, we all make a great connection, and that everyone enjoys it.
Great.
Great. Yeah, essentially,
What does it mean?
Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the title of the last sutra, so the last book that Siddhartha Buddha wrote before he died. Essentially, you've got two strains of Buddhism out there. You've got the larger way and the smaller way. And the larger way tends to be associated with Tibetan and Indian Buddhism, and the idea of living an ascetic life, giving up all worldly desires. And that genuinely means becoming a monk and shaving your head and, you know, wearing the robe and all of that.
Just having that life of abstinence and complete sacrifice. Yeah.
And Nichiren Daishonin was a real person in the 13th century, and what he said that was considered deeply heretical was that you can attain Buddhahood, and Buddhahood is the idea of the 10 other worlds. All of those are contained in Buddhahood. So Buddhahood is not just peace and, you know, oneness of everything. I think it gets misdefined as that. It's an idea of taking the good parts of all of those lowly worlds. So you can be angry, but that can have a positive function in your life. And what Nichiren said was that you can achieve Buddhahood in this lifetime. And, you know, he was quite heavily prosecuted for that, and it was considered a bad thing because most people then and also now believe that unless you practice as a monk for, you know, quite a long time, I've heard as long as 7 lifetimes, you cannot achieve Buddhahood. But it's kind of fundamentally based on this principle of polishing your life force, which is something that's contained within you. It's not external, it's not a god, and it's not that you are a god, but that you have Buddhahood within you, and that by praying and saying Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, you are revering your life, you're respecting your life, and that will give you some wisdom and some strength to move towards where you want to go.
It's great.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
I don't have any issue with it.
Well, I practiced very diligently from sort of 19 to 23. And when I had my breakdown, I was very confused and frankly, I was scared to chant. I was scared because a lot of the things I'd wanted in my life, I chanted for and I got. And there's this sort of idea of turning poison into medicine is the phrase. The idea of bringing up all of your shit so that you can deal with it and it can no longer afflict you in the same way. And actually doing it now, right here, rather than on your deathbed or in the next lifetime. So I was a bit concerned that if I continue to practice in this sort of very devout manner,
So what came to the surface for you?
Sorry?
So what came to the surface for you?
Mostly, look, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but I was born with a cleft palate. And I was really angry about that. Yeah, really, really. And I think that I started to realize that playing guitar, and I'm a pretty decent guitar player, but it was much more about showing other people, hey, this is what I can do, therefore you'll like/respect me. Then it
regardless of whatever flaws I may appear to have. Right?
Yeah, it was about gaining some kind of
approval,
yeah.
Recognition, acknowledgement, yeah.
I'm a little bit suspicious of that, actually. So for me, I've sort of spent a reasonable amount of time in my life thinking about how that plays out for myself and just trying to reduce that need. It's still there, of course, but I try and be aware of it and just to reduce it. And it comes out in my work because,
What about the concept that we already are what we seek?
We already are what we seek. What do I think about that?
Yeah.
I think we have the potential as human beings. I think it's the highest blessing you can have is to be born as a human being. And I think that we have everything inside of us that we need to be who we are. But I also am wary, and this is my personal opinion, not necessarily a religious one, of saying, I'm all right and you're all right and it's all right. Yeah. I think you can do a lot of harm to yourself by not being honest with yourself and saying, well, what do I want? Why do I want it? What do I think that's going to bring into my life? And this is a big one. I genuinely believe you can do whatever you want to do in life, right? But you need to understand what it's going to cost you. And that's true in music, sports, promotional, like self-help speaking, whatever you want to do, you need to and understand what it's going to cost you. And a lot of people aren't prepared to sort of pay the price. They think it's just going to be some time or just be some financial input. But it's usually about severe levels of dedication. Yeah.
Loneliness, sadness. I know all about it. I sold everything I owned to come here and be a rock star. I know all about it. And you realize the things that you give away, and you speak to your best mate on the phone. You go, just wish I was back there, with those guys. And you give away that, and you give away family, and you give away, all sorts of things.
So back in the day, Martin, why do you think, looking back, you wanted to be a quote unquote rock star? What did you think that was going to give you at that time?
Exactly. It's a really good question. And at the time, I didn't know. I just knew that I wanted to play in front of big crowds. Make rad albums, and do what my heroes were doing. Yeah. And at any cost. So it didn't matter about the girl. It didn't. The girls. It didn't matter about. None of that mattered. It didn't matter about the career. So I just made all these decisions. Like, just get a shitty job. Who gives a shit? Just fuck whatever, man. Let's do it. And then life, as you go along, you start realizing, well, fuck, it could be a lot quicker if I had a better job. So you get a better job, a better day job. If I'm going to spend this much time doing this, I might as well get one that pays better, so I can afford to do, buy more gear and and then as you go along, as do most musicians, life changes for you. Things happen. You fall in love, or you move to a certain place, and the whole plan was just to go there. And I totally get it. I think about the cost of that. Now, fortunately, I'm in a very good place right now, so that's fine.
Let me ask something. I think we can all relate to that, but don't you think it's looking back on it? If you could look back on your story, right, and look at that, knowing what you went through, would you do it again?
Fucking A.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Fucking A. Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be a rock star. I think where people go wrong is they confuse the desire to be a musician in its purest sense. I read it somewhere, I've forgotten who said it. I think it was Waylon Jennings or one of those old country guys said, if you need to be with the music, your music, every day, then you should be a musician. But if you don't need to be with the music every day, for God's sake, find something else.
It's about identity, mate.
Yeah.
And it's like what Cameron Diaz said as well. Yeah. She was talking about, if you just want to be famous, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time.
And there's not, the thing is, my father's a retired broadcaster. He was a television presenter. And it's interesting because I watched his ascent as a kid. And I watched him go sort of like a level below Bert Newton over here, he was definitely Premier League, but the lower levels of it. But all of his contemporaries were the absolute top rated guys.
Tip-top guy,
Some of whom have been sort of junior researchers underneath him. And his own doubts about his own career really struck me as a kid. So now, knowing what I know, being what I've been through, working in pharma and reading a lot and thinking about it, I can see clearly where my own tendencies in terms of mental health, to use the expression, come from with regards to my father and my mother. It's not so much what you do. It's not even so much how successful the world tells you are. It's how you feel about what you do.
Yes, I think I agree 100%. Once I realised that, and from talking to you as well, like one of the smartest things you ever said to me is very few bands come through here and do a second album with me. Oh yeah, because they will just fall apart.
Yeah.
They don't fucking make it. They fall apart for one reason or another. So for me, when I heard that, it was like, I don't think I heard it at the time I was mastering my second album with you. It's like, because that's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, cool. Guess what? I'm 38 and I'm still going. At the time, 36 and I'm still going. I'm still in a tight band that we consider family, and we're creating something every single week. So for me, that's a level of success.
Absolutely. Especially as, you said that you'd had these changes. Your bandmates would have had these changes.
Absolutely.
Not just in your life. I think it's more your perspective changes through the information that you gain from your life changing.
Not to mention having children or whatever it is that they do. My guitarist is expecting his second child, but we, rather than using that as a reason to split up and stop doing music, we've used that as a reason to change the way we do music and continue to progress hand in hand fucking in this direction, this way, so that we can release third albums and fucking singles and videos and stuff. We've got a mission, we've got a method, and it's a constant source of joy.
It's been interesting to watch sort of the spread of digital and the so-called demise of the major four and all of this, and I deal with a lot of different age guitar players in my business. I see kids and I see it's a horrible expression, but weekend warriors.
Yep.
And I see baby boomers, and I see current day rock stars, ex-rock stars, guys that have made it, lost it, and they've made it again. And what you start to realize is a lot of the guys who have already made some money, had a nasty divorce, or, didn't recoup some time and, had to write a check that wiped them out. They've kind of come full circle again to realize that, they could probably sit back and rely on their PRS check and some healthy stock investments and sell off 100 guitars, but they actually quite like doing this shit.
Yes.
And after a while, they don't care that it's, I don't know, some crappy festival in Bendigo, sorry people in Bendigo, as opposed to some huge headlining thing. It's just the gig is the gig. And well, like the weird thing about gigs is some of them go great, and some of them go terrible. It's never always the things you think are going to.
Some you play to 18 people, and it's just one of the best fucking gigs of the tour.
Yeah.
It's just awesome.
And I reckon some of the best gigs I've seen have been, no doubt maybe you guys have shared the same experience, but gigs where it was probably the least amount of people with a band playing, where I saw Spy versus 3 people to see Spy versus Spy in 1986, the Horseshoe Tavern, Toronto. They may as well have been playing at fucking 300,000 that night. Yeah, but that's what it takes. That's the mindset.
And 100% of the crowd were fucking stoked with that show.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters.
It's like to tie in what we're talking about with the idea of mental health and how that's changing.
I see what you did there.
The World Health Authority has gone from saying 15 years ago that depression as a comorbid factor, which is a fancy way of saying something that might add to your death, is 33 on the list. And the WHO is extremely reliable data. It's always a little bit out of date. It takes them a long time to compile it, but it's essentially pharma-free data. They're now saying that, I think it's by 2020, in the developed world, it's going to be number 4 on the list of things that kill you. And I look at that, and I look at things like, the median house price in Sydney is now 13 times the average salary. So things like, it won't actually matter if you went to Caulfield Grammar or Geelong Grammar, because unless mummy and daddy are going to write a check for $500,000, you can't afford that house, because the banks won't lend you the ratio you need to provide the rest of it. And I'm intrigued to see how all of that is going to play out in Australia, in the UK. Obviously America's had its thing. And
what scares me is that you're dead right. The cost of a house plus interest is the same as you'll make in a lifetime if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Now, what's Japan done? They're doing multi-generational mortgages. So you take out a mortgage and your child or your grandchild pays it off. And they just keep working and working and working and working. So, and that's where it's going. That's what'll happen, because Japan are 10 years ahead of us on everything. You look at their supermarkets, you see the gadgets they've got going. Self-checkouts will come and go, and it'll be the girl behind the self-checkout that does the work for you. But my point is that the scariest thing about these mortgages and these house prices and is that people actually do think they can afford it.
Yeah, and I think there's a seismic shift that's happened very recently inside Australia. If you look at Australian house prices after the Second World War, it tends to move in these flatlined ways, and then it jumps. The median, if you strike a line through that, is very similar to the UK, because obviously you've got a large amount of European immigrants, and the idea of owning the bricks and mortar as being safe. But I think what's happened is I remember going to a friend's wedding like 8 years ago, and him and his wife had just mortgaged their bollocks off to buy a house not far from here, actually. That was quite nice. And the idea was that, well, this way we don't have to move, we don't have to pay stamp duty twice, which is expensive, all these things. And we'll, after about 15 years, we'll have sort of chunked it down. But of course, 7 years later, they got divorced, etc., etc. I think that what might happen is people start to realise, I don't really want to do this, I want to rent. And it's a hassle and I have to move, and, it might be insecure when I'm older, but I feel that when I speak to young people in their early to mid-20s, they've kind of started to realise that, this isn't, I don't sure if I want to go this way.
It's funny you should say that. I've been renting this house for 10 years.
Cool.
I love this place.
Yeah.
It cost me nothing. It cost me fuck all. And if there was a major disaster and the place fell down, I'd just grab the guitars and walk out and get another place.
Yeah.
I don't lose anything.
And there's a freedom to that.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to do it in this sort of UK way. If you look at how what Germany did after the Second War, which they didn't really have a choice, but they did this similar to New York, this rent fix. So in Berlin, if you rent an apartment, but it's more severe than that. If you rent an apartment in Berlin, of which 85% are owned, it's not government, it's superannuation, effectively insurance companies own them. And you rent an apartment there. It's written in your contract that when you leave, you have to return the apartment to its original conditions. So you get people who have long-term leases there. It's really, really normal. They have like a 10 or a 15-year lease, and they'll apply to do up the bathroom. And the owner will say, I'm not putting any money in, but sure, you can do that, no problem. And when they leave, they actually have to smash the bathroom up and return it back to its original condition, because their experience of hyperinflation was so severe between the wars that they kind of figured out that if we can't get if we can control speculation, we can control what actually happens of treating a home as a primary source of investment. Let's be honest, for most white middle class people, it's the fundamental way they invest their money, which I think it's a broken record. I do too.
I rather than invest money into a house, I took the body shop lady's advice. She said never buy anything, rent everything. She's dead now, but hey, if she's so smart, how come she's dead? But her method was rent everything. Because you're tying up capital. You're tying up $1 million into a house, right? And you could be spending that money on a business or 25 businesses if money's your thing,
And we can see that trend by seeing Airbnb. And Uber being as big as they are. I mean, because now,
but they can't tax Uber, and they're finding it difficult to tax. I read the other day that Airbnb, the average Melburnian household that does it properly, is bringing in $7,000 a year doing that. And my girlfriend and I have been talking about building a tiny home, like on a portable trailer thing, which I kind of like the idea. But my concern with it is that once it becomes an actual definable, measurable trend, that's a percentage enough to scare the powers that be, that they will find a way of taxing it out of being economically viable.
So they should. Tax is taxed, income's income. But as we get closer towards the end of this, do you want to tie this back up to mental health, the house
wherever
thing?
it goes. I'm
cool.
Pretty easy.
Sure.
I guess fundamentally, when Jack and I spoke about it, I said, look, I'm really keen for it not to be an infomercial about my guitar making business. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No,
but,
sure.
I guess fundamentally,
so tell us about your 50% off special next week.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess I just wanted to sort of, I noticed I've had 4 apprentices in the last 6 years, 3 of whom were in their early 20s. And I get a distinct impression that attitudes to mental health, attitudes to homosexuality are definitely changing. And I get the feeling that it's just even the numbers are so high that people are realizing, well, we could not talk about it, but then there's like only 2 people in the room who are able to have a conversation without hiding something, you know. And for me, I guess I just wanted to try and be some kind of an example that, yeah, actually at times my illness is really severe, like severe, and I know that. But some of the ways it's defined me, for example, is I was really good at my job as a pharmaceutical rep, about 4 days a month, you know, like, and if I could have learned how to toe the line and shut my mouth and ignore certain things and just be more consistent, I could have had a so-called great career in that. But it struck me as ridiculous and I didn't like it. And so at certain points in my life, I felt forced into working for myself. Now I don't feel that way at all. I just really enjoy it, and it works out well for me by any metric. So I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, it's still the expression bipolar is still a frightening buzzword for lots of people. And I get that, you know, but it's not all doom and gloom. Basically.
No.
All right.
Radical.
I think we might wind it up there.
Yep, done.
All right then.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, mate.
Thanks
for being so honest and transparent. And for someone who's known you for a long time, I can honestly say you're a guy with great integrity. And
thanks, appreciate it.
It's been really good to reconnect. And thanks for coming on and saying g'day and having a chat.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Morton.
Peace out.
So where can we? So speaking of gratuitous infomercials,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, where do we?
What do you want us to know? What do you want the
I
people to
don't
know?
currently have a website. I used to have a lot of that stuff.
We've got a Facebook, Twitter, something.
Yeah,
people
essentially, I do it through my own personal page because I had the business page, and as you all know, it doesn't reach anyone. You can reach me on Facebook.com, Joseph Price. It's normally a picture of either me and my son, he's the better looking one, or some guitar stuff. And I guess it looks a little bit vague, but I do it because I try and provide a lot of one-on-one time. So I don't have any open days. I do it by appointment only. And it just means I'm able to provide a really personalized service, which is how I like to do it. And I think it's the best way to go.
100%.
Great.
Love the way you roll, dude.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cool.
All right.
And
your Twitter and shit?
just damnthemaps.com, y'all. So
right.
easy.
And Jack the Bear, Tony Jack the Bear Mantz on Facebook, Jack the _Bear on Twitter, and Jack the Bear 1063 for the Instagram. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. All right, we're off. We'll be off, and we'll see you guys really soon. So have a good one. And as we always say, be nice to each other, but more importantly, be nice to yourselves. All right. Ciao.
Cheers. Merry Christmas.